It was supposed to be just another routine flight. The hum of engines filled the cabin as passengers settled into their seats, some flipping through magazines, others adjusting their neck pillows. Among them was Mariah, a confident and accomplished black businesswoman in her late 30s, carrying herself with a calm assurance that spoke of years of experience navigating the world. She had no idea that this ordinary trip would lead to an extraordinary chain of events, one that would change not just her life, but also shake the very foundation of the airport itself. Maria loved to travel. She found peace in the chaos of terminals, the click-clack of heels on polished floors, and the buzz of announcements echoing through the gates. Her suitcase was a reflection of her personality, sleek, polished, and always prepared. She had flown countless times without incident, but today something was different. There was an air of unease she couldn't quite place, and it wasn't long before she understood why. The flight attendant in question, a young woman named Amanda, seemed unusually watchful. Maria noticed her lingering glances as she walked down the aisle to find her seat, the kind of look that made you feel out of place without reason. It was subtle, but Maria had seen it before, an unspoken tension that spoke volumes. She chose to ignore it, focusing instead on the emails she needed to catch up on before landing. Little did she know, Amanda's wary eyes would soon turn into something far more consequential. The moment came when Maria requested a simple glass of water before takeoff. It wasn't an unusual request, but Amanda's reaction was. Her tone was sharp, her words clipped, as though Maria had asked for something outrageous. The interaction caught the attention of nearby passengers, their gazes darting between the two women. Maria, ever composed, thanked Amanda and returned to her seat, brushing off the encounter. But the unease lingered. As the flight progressed, small moments piled up. Amanda's eyes seemed to follow Maria's every move, her demeanor growing increasingly rigid. When Maria stood up to stretch her legs, Amanda approached her with a thinly veiled edge to her voice. "Ma'am, you need to return to your seat immediately," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Maria complied without question, though the embarrassment prickled beneath her skin. It wasn't until the flight landed that the situation escalated. As passengers disembarked, Maria was met at the gate by two uniformed police officers. Confused and blindsided, she asked what was going on. Amanda had reported her, claiming Maria had been disruptive and uncooperative during the flight, a claim as baseless as it was humiliating. The officers, following protocol, questioned Maria in front of dozens of onlookers, many of whom recognized the blatant discrepancy between Amanda's accusation and Maria's calm demeanor throughout the flight. The injustice stung deeply. Maria, a woman who had built her career on poise and professionalism, found herself standing in an airport surrounded by judgmental stares, all because someone had made assumptions about her based on the color of her skin. But Maria wasn't one to let such moments define her. If Amanda and the system thought they could reduce her to a stereotype, they had gravely underestimated her resilience. What Amanda and everyone else didn't know was that Maria wasn't just a passenger. She was a visionary entrepreneur with the resources and connections to turn indignation into action. And as she left the airport that day, she wasn't thinking about the humiliation or the stares. She was thinking about what she could do to ensure no one else ever faced the same treatment she had endured. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would rewrite the narrative entirely. Because just 8 minutes after that humiliating encounter, Maria made a phone call, and what she set in motion would not only change her life, but would leave the entire airport staff, including Amanda, utterly speechless. Stay tuned to find out how Maria turned a moment of injustice into a triumph no one saw coming. This is the story of grit, determination, and the ultimate power move. You won't believe what happens next. Maria's heels clicked against the glossy airport floor as she walked away from the gate, her mind racing. The air felt heavier, the murmurs of passing travelers more intrusive. She kept her head high and her composure intact, but inside she was seething. How had things escalated so quickly? What had Amanda seen in her, a well-dressed, educated woman, that made her assume she was a threat? Maria had faced discrimination before, But this felt different. This wasn't just a personal slight. It was a glaring example of a deeper problem, one she could no longer ignore. As she approached the baggage claim area, Maria pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. On the other end was her trusted assistant, Simone, a sharp and resourceful woman who had been by Maria's side through every major business venture. "Simone," Maria began, her voice calm but tinged with determination, "I need you to clear my schedule for the next week. Something important has come up." Simone didn't ask questions. She knew Maria well enough to recognize that tone. "Understood. Is there anything specific I should prioritize?" Maria paused, dancing around the bustling terminal. "Yes, I need everything you can find on this airport. The ownership, the management, the financials. I need it fast." As she ended the call, Maria felt a flicker of clarity. The humiliation she'd endured wasn't just about her. It was about a system that allowed people like Amanda to wield power without accountability. If she had the means to challenge that system, then she had a responsibility to act. This wasn't just about making a statement. It was about creating real change. Maria's drive back to her hotel was quiet, but her mind was anything but. Memories surfaced of the hurdles she'd overcome to get where she was today. Growing up in a small town, she'd faced more than her fair share of challenges. She had been underestimated, doubted, and overlooked time and again. But each setback had only fueled her determination to succeed. She had built her company from the ground up, transforming it into a global powerhouse. Her success wasn't handed to her. It was earned through grit, perseverance, and an unshakable belief in her worth. That belief was what carried her through moments like this. Maria wasn't the type to lash out or let anger cloud her judgment. Instead, she channeled her energy into strategy, into finding solutions that left no room for doubt. And as the city lights blurred past her car window, a plan began to take shape. Back at the hotel, Maria set up her laptop at the desk and dove into research. The airport where the incident had occurred wasn't just a transportation hub. It was a sprawling enterprise worth billions. Its operations extended far beyond ticketing and security. It was a microcosm of commerce, with restaurants, shops, and services all contributing to its bottom line. But it wasn't invincible. Airports were complex businesses, often relying on a delicate balance of government funding, private investment, and public trust. If there was a way to make an impact, Maria was determined to find it. The next day, Simone called with an update. "I've pulled everything on the airport's ownership structure," she said. "It's managed by a private company under a long-term lease agreement with the city. The company's board is mostly made up of investors. But they've been under scrutiny for how they handle complaints and employee training." Maria's ears perked up. "What kind of scrutiny?" she asked. Simone continued, "There have been allegations of bias and discrimination in their hiring practices, and their customer service training has been criticized as inadequate. It's all buried under legalese, but there's a definite pattern." That was the opening Maria needed. "Simone, I want a meeting with their board. Use our connections and make it happen as soon as possible," she instructed. Simone hesitated. "Are you sure? They might try to brush this off." Maria smiled faintly, her resolve unshaken. "Let them try. I'm not just another passenger filing a complaint. They need to understand that this won't go away quietly." Over the next few days, Maria prepared meticulously. She reviewed every detail of the airport's operations, every complaint that had been filed against them, and every initiative they claimed to support. She wasn't going into this meeting as a victim. She was going in as a force to be reckoned with. When the day of the meeting arrived, Maria walked into the boardroom with the same confidence she carried everywhere else. The room was filled with executives, their suits crisp and their expressions guarded. They had no idea what to expect, and Maria intended to keep them off balance. She introduced herself calmly, outlining the events that had unfolded during her flight. But she didn't stop there. She presented them with a detailed analysis of the airport's shortcomings, backed by data and testimonials from others who had experienced similar treatment. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Maria could see the cracks forming in their polished facade. When she finished her presentation, she leaned forward, her voice steady but firm. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about the culture you've allowed to thrive here. And if you're not willing to address it, I will." One of the executives, an older man with a sharp gaze, spoke up. "What exactly are you proposing?" Maria smiled, her confidence radiating through the room. "I'm proposing a partnership, or if you prefer, a takeover. This airport has the potential to be a model of inclusivity and excellence, but only if the leadership is willing to make real changes. If you're not prepared to do that, I'll take it off your hands and show you how it's done." The room fell silent. Maria's words hum in the air, a challenge and a promise all at once. She knew she had their attention, but this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come, and Maria was ready for it. Back at her hotel, Maria reflected on how far she'd come since that fateful flight. What had started as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a mission, a chance to turn adversity into opportunity. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Maria had never been one to back down from a challenge. And as she stared out at the city skyline, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The days following the meeting were a whirlwind. Maria's challenge to the board had clearly shaken them, but she knew they wouldn't capitulate so easily. People in power rarely did, especially when their authority was being questioned by someone who didn't fit their mold of leadership. But Maria wasn't interested in playing by their rules. She was rewriting them. Simone worked tirelessly to keep Maria updated. Reports came in detailing the airport's operations, including its partnerships, contracts, and internal policies. Maria noticed a disturbing trend. Many of the airport's contracts favored companies with questionable reputations, prioritizing profit over ethics. Complaints from both employees and passengers about discriminatory practices and poor treatment were buried under layers of bureaucracy. It was a culture of negligence, one that allowed incidents like her own to happen repeatedly, unchecked. Maria knew she needed more than facts and figures to make her case. She needed voices. She began reaching out to people who had been affected by the airport's policies, listening to their stories and gathering evidence. A young black man shared how he had been racially profiled by security staff during a routine screening. A single mother described being dismissed rudely by customer service after her flight was delayed for hours without explanation. An elderly couple recounted being stranded overnight because no one cared enough to assist them when their connection was cancelled. The stories piled up, each one more heartbreaking than the last. But amidst the frustration and pain, there was a common thread: hope. People were eager to see someone take a stand, and Maria became that symbol for them. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had been overlooked, mistreated, or ignored. While Maria built her case, the airport board was not sitting idle. Word of her confrontation had spread, and it was clear they were scrambling to protect their interests. Maria began receiving subtle pushback, delayed responses to her inquiries, vague excuses from the board about their availability for follow-up meetings. It was the kind of resistance designed to wear her down, to make her feel as though she was fighting a losing battle. But Maria wasn't easily discouraged. One evening, as she reviewed documents in her office, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. When she answered, the voice on the other end was low and hesitant. "Ms. Mariah," the man began, "I hope you don't mind me calling. I heard about what you're doing, and I thought you should know something." The man introduced himself as a former employee of the airport, someone who had worked behind the scenes in operations. He explained that he had left his position after witnessing unethical practices that he couldn't condone. "They cut corners wherever they can," he said. "Safety, training, customer service. It's all about saving money. And if anyone tries to speak up, they're silenced." Maria listened carefully, her pen moving swiftly across a notepad. This was the inside perspective she needed. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. The man paused. "Because I think you might actually do something about it," he admitted. "And because people like you don't come around often." The call left Maria more determined than ever. She had the pieces of the puzzle. Now it was a matter of putting them together. But even as she gained momentum, the challenges grew more complex. News outlets began to pick up on the story, framing it as a David and Goliath battle between Maria and the airport's powerful board. Public opinion was divided. Some hailed Maria as a trailblazer, a fearless leader fighting for justice. Others dismissed her efforts as a publicity stunt, questioning her motives and capabilities. Maria ignored the noise, focusing instead on her mission. She met with lawyers, business strategists, and community leaders, building a coalition of allies who believed in her vision. Among them was a retired airport executive who had witnessed firsthand the systemic issues Maria was up against. "It's going to take more than money and determination to turn this around," he warned. "You're challenging an entire institution. Are you ready for that?" "I've been ready my whole life," Maria replied without hesitation. But not everyone shared her conviction. Amanda, the flight attendant who had sparked this entire chain of events, watched from the sidelines as Maria's campaign gained traction. She hadn't anticipated the fallout from her actions that day. What she thought would be a routine report had spiraled into a national story, and now her own behavior was under scrutiny. Amanda began to feel the pressure from her employer and the public alike, her once steady job now hanging by a thread. Yet, instead of reflecting on her role in the incident, she clung to her version of events, unwilling to acknowledge the larger implications. The board, too, was feeling the heat. Their attempts to discredit Maria were met with resistance from an increasingly vocal public. Protests began to form outside the airport, with signs that read, "Accountability now," and "End discrimination in aviation." Social media buzzed with hashtags supporting Maria's fight, amplifying her story to audiences far and wide. Behind closed doors, however, the board was plotting its next move. They knew Maria's takeover bid posed a real threat, and they weren't about to let her waltz in without a fight. They began rallying their own allies, including corporate sponsors and political figures, painting Maria as an outsider with no understanding of the industry. It was a battle of wills, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Maria felt the weight of it all, the expectations, the scrutiny, the endless obstacles. But she also felt something else, a growing sense of purpose. This fight wasn't just about her anymore. It was about proving that change was possible, even in a world that seemed determined to resist it. As the tension built, Maria knew she was approaching a critical moment. The board was stalling, hoping she would lose steam, but she had no intention of backing down. She had come too far, learned too much, and gained too much support to stop now. The question wasn't whether she could succeed. It was how far she was willing to go to make it happen. And as the days turned into weeks, Maria braced herself for the next chapter in this extraordinary battle. The day of the showdown arrived with a stormy grey sky that seemed to mirror the tension hanging in the air. Maria stood in front of the mirror in her hotel suite, adjusting the lapel of her tailored blazer. Her reflection stared back at her calm and composed, though she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was it. Months of preparation, countless late nights, and more than a few moments of doubt had led her here. Today, she was meeting the airport's board for a final round of negotiations, or, as she preferred to see it, a reckoning. Simone had arranged for a private car to take Maria to the meeting, but even inside the quiet, leather-lined vehicle, she couldn't escape the buzz of anticipation. Outside the airport, protesters had gathered again, their chants muffled but persistent. Signs bobbed in the air, many of them with Maria's name scrawled in bold letters. It was surreal to see herself become a symbol, but she didn't dwell on it. This fight was bigger than her. As the car pulled up to the terminal, Maria's phone vibrated with a message from Simone. They're already in the conference room. "You've got this." Maria typed back a quick response and stepped out of the car, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She walked through the terminal, her presence commanding attention. Some travelers paused to look at her, their expressions a mix of curiosity and recognition. Others whispered to one another, clearly aware of the story that had captured headlines. Maria took the elevator up to the executive level, where a security guard escorted her to the boardroom. The room was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bustling runways below. The board members were already seated at a long mahogany table, their faces a mixture of skepticism and thinly veiled irritation. At the head of the table was the chairman, a man in his 60s with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ms. Mariah," he greeted, gesturing to an empty chair near the center of the table. "Thank you for joining us. We're eager to hear what you have to say." Mariah sat down, her posture straight and her gaze steady. "Thank you for having me," she replied, her tone polite but firm. "I believe we have a lot to discuss." The next hour was a verbal chess match. Maria presented her case with precision, outlining the systemic failures that had plagued the airport for years. She backed her claims with data, testimonials, and even internal documents provided by the former employee who had reached out to her. The board members listened, their expressions ranging from disinterest to thinly veiled frustration. They countered her points with corporate jargon and carefully rehearsed defenses, but Maria was ready for them at every turn. The tension in the room was palpable. Maria could see the cracks forming in their united front, but the chairman was holding firm. "While we appreciate your passion, Ms. Mariah," he said, his tone patronizing, "running an airport is far more complex than you might realize. This isn't about isolated incidents or personal grievances. It's about maintaining the larger system." Maria leaned forward, her voice unwavering. "With all due respect, the larger system is exactly what's broken. You've allowed a culture of complacency and bias to thrive under your watch, and it's not just affecting passengers like me. It's affecting your employees, your reputation, and your bottom line." The chairman's smile faltered for a moment before he regained his composure. "And what exactly do you propose we do?" he asked, his tone laced with condescension. Maria didn't miss a beat. "Step aside," she said. The words landed like a thunderclap, and the room fell silent. "Let me and my team take over operations. We have the vision, the resources, and the commitment to turn this airport into a model for excellence and inclusivity. You've had your chance, and the results speak for themselves." The board erupted into murmurs, their voices overlapping in a mix of disbelief and indignation. The chairman held up a hand to silence them, his expression unreadable. "That's a bold statement, Ms. Mariah," he said, "and while I admire your confidence, I'm afraid it's not that simple." Maria met his gaze without flinching. "It's not simple, but it's necessary. You can either work with me to make this transition smooth, or you can resist and face the consequences. Either way, change is coming." Before the chairman could respond, the door to the boardroom opened, and an assistant hurried in, whispering something in his ear. His eyes flickered with annoyance, and he excused himself to step outside. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, their whispers filling the room. Maria sat back in her chair, her heart pounding, but her expression calm. She didn't know what was happening, but she had a feeling the game was shifting in her favor. Minutes later, the chairman returned, his face pale and his movements stiff. He cleared his throat and addressed the room. "It seems we have a situation," he said, his voice strained. "The media has obtained some sensitive information about our operations. It appears that certain complaints and incidents were not properly addressed or reported, and now they're being made public." Maria's lips curled into a faint smile. She knew exactly what had happened. The former employee who had reached out to her had also decided to go public with his story, providing journalists with the evidence they needed to expose the airport's failures. It was a calculated risk, one that Maria had supported, knowing it would apply the pressure the board was so desperate to avoid. The boardroom descended into chaos, the members arguing over damage control and next steps. Maria remained silent, watching as the carefully constructed facade of authority began to crumble. The chairman finally turned to her, his expression a mixture of anger and resignation. "It seems we have no choice but to consider your proposal," he said, the words bitter on his tongue. Maria leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "You're right," she said. "You don't." The room fell silent again, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The climax was nearing, and everyone in that room knew it. All that remained was for Maria to deliver the final blow, one that would solidify her place as not just a passenger, but a force of change.